Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at lifecycle management
Oh, yeah.
in software development.
Mm.
And we've got some really fascinating sources
Yeah.
to dive into. One of them is actually a series called The Cadet and the Defense of Planet Codex.
Oh, cool.
And it uses a really cool storytelling approach
Yeah.
to explain lifecycle management.
I love those kind of resources that really make it
Yeah.
very approachable, and especially for a topic like this, which can be a little dry if
Yeah.
you're not, really into it.
Exactly.
So yeah, how do they kind of frame it? What's the...
So this story actually follows a cadet named Arin.
Okay.
And she's learning to defend this planet
Mm-hmm.
from bugs and glitches using this power called Reactium.
So is this like their version of React, or is it...
It is, yeah. So Reactium is their version of React, which is a JavaScript library
Right.
that's used to, build dynamic user interfaces.
I gotcha.
So I thought that was really clever.
It's
Yeah.
a clever way to kind of frame it,
Yeah.
for people who maybe aren't, super familiar
Sure.
with the technical ins and outs.
So to set the scene, Planet Codex,
Yeah.
which is where Arin is stationed,
Yeah.
relies on Reactium for its stability,
Mm.
responsiveness, all of that. But like any complex system, it's vulnerable to these attacks.
Right.
So Erin's whole training is basically about mastering Reactium
Yeah.
so that she can keep the planet running smoothly,
Makes sense.
which is kind of what lifecycle management is all about in software.
Right. Exactly. Like, think about it like this. Like every time you use like an app or a website, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a ton of stuff happening behind the scenes to make sure that everything is working smoothly
Yeah.
and that there's no like hiccups or anything. And lifecycle management is kind of the art of controlling, how your code behaves at different stages of its existence.
Yeah.
So from when it's first loaded to when it needs to update to when it needs to shut down.
Yeah.
And it's all about making sure that that happens efficiently.
Right.
So that, you don't have, your app constantly crashing or freezing.
Yeah, because nobody wants that.
No.
So the story actually kicks off with Arin facing a real challenge,
Mm-hmm.
this messy piece of code called the products module.
Okay.
It's constantly glitching, causing all these problems.
Gotcha. So this is kind of like the bugs.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like the pesky bugs attacking Planet Codex.
I like it.
And so the story highlights how this chaos is often caused by, poorly managed life cycles.
Right.
And the example code they show even uses
Okay.
common React tools like the useEffect hook.
Right.
It shows how they can be misused and lead to performance issues.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like useEffect is really powerful, but
yeah.
you can definitely misuse it if you're not careful.
So before we kind of dive deeper into useEffect,
Yeah.
could you explain what a hook is?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So in React, hooks are kind of like special functions that let you hook into React features from your components. So, it's a more modern way to handle things that, traditionally were done with more complex class components.
Okay, so they're kind of like shortcuts for common tasks.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Yeah. So now back to useEffect.
Uh-huh.
What makes it so important
Yeah.
in lifecycle management?
So useEffect is all about managing side effects. And side effects are basically any actions that happen outside of React's core rendering process. So imagine you need to fetch some data from an external API, or you need to set up a timer. Those are examples of side effects.
It's kind of like calling for reinforcements or setting up a perimeter defense outside of the main battle.
Exactly.
It's essential, but it needs to be carefully coordinated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because, if those things aren't handled properly, it can really mess up, the flow of your application.
And in the story, Erin's initial struggles with the products module show what happens when useEffect is used incorrectly.
Yeah.
It's kind of like she's swinging her weapon wildly without any strategy.
Yeah, just creating more chaos than she's solving.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that analogy.
And so the story highlights 3 common pitfalls with useEffect.
Okay.
Unnecessary data transformations, managing derived state, and improper handling of API calls.
Gotcha.
We'll unpack each of those as we go deeper.
Sounds good.
So let's start with data transformations.
Okay.
How does Arin learn to handle this more effectively?
So she discovers the power of use memo,
Okay.
which is another, essential hook in React. And think of use memo as like a way to optimize those expensive calculations and prevent unnecessary re-renders.
Hold on. What's a re-render and why should we care about preventing them?
Oh, that's a great question. So in React, whenever the data that a component relies on changes, it might trigger a re-render, which basically means React has to like redraw that part of the user interface.
Right. Gotcha.
And too many re-renders can really make your application sluggish,
right?
Especially if you're dealing with complex calculations or large data sets.
So it's like repainting your entire house just to fix a tiny scratch.
Exactly.
Waste of time and resources.
Yeah, total waste. And so use memo is kind of like Arin, learning to be more efficient with her movements, you know?
Yeah.
Conserving energy, making sure that she's only acting when necessary.
So by using useMemo effectively, developers can make their applications run smoother and faster?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the story, Arin actually uses useMemo to optimize the way that the products module filters data, and that helps to prevent those redundant updates and really improves performance.
Cool. So that's one superpower.
Yeah.
Down.
Yeah.
What other challenges does Arin face?
Let's see. Well, another crucial concept is derived state.
Okay.
And this is basically data that can be calculated from other pieces of state within a component. And in the story, Arin initially overcomplicates things by using, useEffect and useState to try to manage this derived state. But she quickly learns a better way.
Wait, before we go further, can you remind us what state means?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So state is basically like the internal memory of a React component.
Okay.
It's the data that it needs to keep track of to function correctly. And derived state, as I mentioned, is information that you don't need to store directly because it can be figured out from other state values.
Got it. So it's kind of like having a detective who can deduce crucial information from existing clues instead of gathering every single detail from scratch.
I love that analogy. That's a great way to put it.
And so in the story, Arin realizes that instead of using this complex logic with useState and useEffect to manage derived state, she can actually just compute it directly with the component.
Much simpler.
Exactly. It's like streamlining her actions in battle, making them more direct and efficient.
Absolutely. And in programming, writing clear and concise code is always a win.
Right.
It makes it much easier to understand, to maintain, to debug. And so by directly computing that derived state, Arin's code just becomes much more, elegant and efficient.
So we've covered data transformations with useMemo and simplifying derived state. What other challenges does Arin face?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is managing external interactions, especially API calls, which are, essentially requests for data from external sources.
Okay.
And this is actually represented in the story by this formidable enemy called Queen Glitch, who basically disrupts, everything around her.
So how does Arin learn to handle that kind of threat?
Well, she learns to manage these external interactions with precision and strategy, much like a skilled defender protecting a vital resource. The story really emphasizes the importance of using useEffect correctly for these interactions, particularly when it comes to managing dependencies.
Dependencies. What are those?
Good question. So think of dependencies as the specific things that trigger an effect to run. For example, if you're making an API call to fetch data, the dependency might be a user ID or a search term.
Okay.
And if you don't manage those dependencies correctly, that API call might happen way more often than it needs to, leading to wasted resources and unexpected behavior.
So it's kind of like making sure that you only activate your defenses when there's a real threat, not just randomly firing off alarms all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
You want to be very intentional about when you're making those calls.
And in the story, Arin realizes that her initial approach to API calls was kind of like reacting without a strategy, which led to instability. But by properly using useEffect and managing dependencies, she learns to focus her efforts where they matter most. Wow. I'm really seeing how these concepts from lifecycle management can be applied to so many areas of software development.
It's really foundational stuff.
So far, we've talked about handling side effects with useEffect, optimizing performance with useMemo, and simplifying derived state. This is already giving me a much clearer picture of how developers can keep their code clean, efficient, and bug-free.
Absolutely. And we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover as we continue our deep dive into lifecycle management.
I'm excited.
So before we move on, I wanted to touch on another really important aspect of useEffect.
Yeah.
That's absolutely vital for writing, stable and reliable code. And that's cleanup.
Cleanup. It sounds like we're tidying up after a coding party.
Yeah, kinda.
What exactly does that mean in the world of useEffect?
Well, just like you wouldn't want to leave a mess after a party.
Right.
You don't want to leave any loose ends in your code after an effect has run.
Okay.
And in the story, this is actually linked to Arin's responsibility to prevent these memory leaks.
Okay.
Which can drain resources and destabilize, the whole planet.
Memory leaks sounds scary.
They can be.
Yeah.
They're like these hidden threats that are slowly weakening the planet's defenses. What exactly are they and how do they actually happen in code?
So imagine a program that keeps adding data to a list, but never removes anything. Eventually, that list could grow so large that it consumes all the available memory, causing the program to crash.
Exactly. That's a memory leak.
Oh, wow.
And in React, those leaks can occur if you set up things like event listeners or timers within useEffect, but you don't clean them up when they're no longer needed.
So it's kind of like leaving the faucet running, wasting water and potentially causing damage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just like a dripping faucet can lead to, bigger problems over time.
Yeah.
Memory leaks in software can cause, performance issues, crashes, and even security vulnerabilities.
So how do developers prevent these memory leaks? What's the cleanup process look like?
So the good news is that useEffect has this built-in mechanism for cleanup.
Okay.
When you return a function from within your useEffect callback, that function will be executed when the component unmounts or before the effect runs again.
Okay.
And that's where you would put any logic to clean up those resources.
Gotcha.
Like removing event listeners or canceling timers.
So it's like having a checklist for after the party.
Yeah, exactly.
Turn off the lights, lock the doors, make sure everything's back in its place.
I like it.
Yeah.
Huh.
By following this cleanup routine within useEffect, developers can ensure that their code doesn't leave behind any of those, memory leaks.
Exactly. It's all about being responsible and making sure your code is clean and efficient.
Yeah.
Just like Arin learns to be responsible for the stability of Planet Codex. And this also ties back to the broader concept of software maintainability. Code that's well organized and free of memory leaks is much easier for other developers to understand and work with.
Right.
Which saves time and frustration in the long run.
Now, while useEffect seems incredibly powerful, it also sounds like it requires careful attention to detail.
It does.
What are some things that developers need to keep in mind?
So one important thing is to be mindful of how often your effect runs.
Yeah.
Remember, every time an effect runs, it can potentially trigger a re-render of the component, which, as we talked about earlier, can impact performance.
Right.
So it's crucial to make sure that you're only including dependencies that are absolutely necessary.
Okay.
Think of it like being strategic about calling for reinforcements. You don't want to send out a signal every time there's a minor issue, only when it's truly essential.
So keeping those dependencies minimal and intentional is key.
Exactly.
Anything else?
Yeah. Another good practice is to avoid putting too much logic inside your useEffect hooks. If you find your effect getting really complex, it might be a sign that you need to break it down into smaller, more manageable functions.
Okay.
And this not only makes your code more readable, but it also makes it easier to test and debug.
It's like breaking down a large task into smaller, more digestible steps.
Exactly.
It makes everything seem less daunting and helps you stay organized.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of organization, I remember you mentioned earlier that the overall structure of your components is also important for lifecycle management.
Oh, absolutely. Just like a well-organized city runs more smoothly than a chaotic one.
Yeah.
Well-structured components make your code base much easier to understand, maintain, and extend. Think about it this way. When you're building a city, you wouldn't just randomly place buildings wherever you feel like it.
Yeah.
You would have a plan, a structure to make sure that everything works together efficiently.
So it's not just about managing the life cycle of individual components, but also about how those components all fit together within the larger application.
Exactly. You got to think about the big picture and how all the pieces of your application interact with each other.
Okay.
This includes things like choosing the right component architecture, managing data flow effectively, and following consistent coding conventions.
It sounds like lifecycle management is really about taking this holistic approach
It is.
to software development, thinking about everything from the smallest details to the overall structure of the application.
You got it. And it's an ongoing process.
Right.
It's not just about fixing bugs. It's about creating software that is robust, adaptable, and maintainable over the long term.
Yeah.
And this actually brings us to an interesting point that I think often causes confusion for people who are new to React.
Okay.
This idea that hooks are not life cycle methods.
Wait, I thought we've been talking about life cycle methods this whole time.
I know, right? It's a little tricky.
What do you mean by hooks not being life cycle methods?
So it's a subtle but important distinction.
Okay.
In earlier versions of React, lifecycle methods were built directly into those class components. But with the introduction of hooks like useEffect and useMemo, we have this new way of thinking about managing those component lifecycles.
Right.
Hooks are more flexible, they're more modular, and they allow us to achieve the same functionality, but in a more streamlined and reusable way.
So while we've been using this analogy of Arin's journey and lifecycle methods to understand these basic concepts, it's important to remember that in modern React development, we're actually using hooks to achieve those same goals.
Exactly. It's a bit like how Arin might start her training with basic weapons and techniques. But as she progresses, she learns to use more advanced tools and strategies. Hooks are like those advanced tools, allowing developers to handle these complex scenarios with more elegance and efficiency.
So while understanding the traditional lifecycle methods is still valuable for context, it's crucial for anyone working with React to really embrace those hooks and their capabilities.
Yeah, and don't get too hung up on trying to map hooks directly to the old lifecycle methods. Instead, just focus on understanding those core principles that we've been talking about, managing side effects, optimizing performance, and creating, clean and efficient code.
Right. That makes sense. So it seems like we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From exploring the nuances of useEffect to understanding how component structure impacts the overall application lifecycle.
Right.
It's been a really insightful journey.
Yeah, it has.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
This connection between lifecycle management and the human element of software development.
Oh, that's an excellent point.
At the end of the day, software is created by people for people.
Absolutely.
How does effective lifecycle management impact the developer experience and ultimately the quality of the software that we all use?
Well, I believe that well-managed life cycles lead to happier developers.
Okay.
And as a result, better software for everyone. When code is clean and efficient and well-structured, it's easier to understand, to modify, to debug.
Right.
And this reduces frustration for developers and allows them to focus on creating innovative features and delivering value to users.
So it creates this more positive and productive development environment.
Exactly.
Which ultimately benefits everyone who interacts with the software.
Precisely. It's like building a house with a strong foundation and clear blueprints.
Okay.
Everyone involved, from the architects to the builders to the eventual homeowners, benefits from that solid groundwork.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
It highlights how good lifecycle management isn't just about technical proficiency.
Right.
It's about fostering a collaborative and sustainable approach to software development.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And that's something worth striving for in any software project. Absolutely. It's not just about meeting deadlines. It's about creating an ecosystem where both the code and the people who create it can thrive.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
It really elevates lifecycle management from this purely technical concern to something that has a real impact on people's lives.
It does.
Both those who build software and those who use it.
Absolutely. And I think the story of Arin defending Planet Codex is a beautiful metaphor for that. It's about recognizing that software is more than just lines of code. It's a reflection of our creativity, our problem-solving abilities, and our desire to make a positive impact on the world.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the seemingly technical realm of software development, there's this deep connection to human values and aspirations.
Exactly.
This has been such an enlightening conversation.
It has.
I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the intricacies of software development and the crucial role that lifecycle management plays. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
I'm still kind of processing all these insights about lifecycle management.
Yeah, me too. It's really amazing how something that sounds so technical can be so nuanced and thought-provoking.
Yeah. And the story of Arin defending Planet Codex has been such a cool way to illustrate these parallels.
Absolutely.
It makes it accessible even if you've never written a line of code.
I agree. I think the way they connect her challenges to the complexities of software development is really effective. It highlights how lifecycle management is, this ongoing process of learning, adapting, and refining.
Right.
Just like Arin faces new threats and learns new techniques. Developers are constantly having to evolve their understanding of how to build and maintain software effectively.
Yeah, one of the key takeaways for me has been this idea that hooks are not lifecycle methods.
Right.
It's a subtle distinction, but it really highlights how React has evolved.
And how our thinking about managing a component's lifecycle needs to evolve as well.
It's so easy to get caught up in, old terminology and try to force fit concepts into these new paradigms. But with hooks, React has given us a much more elegant and flexible way to approach these challenges. It's about, embracing these new tools and understanding how they empower us to write their code.
We've talked a lot about the technical side of lifecycle management.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if we can kind of circle back to that human element for a moment.
Sure.
At the end of the day, software is created by people for people. What are your thoughts on how lifecycle management impacts the developer experience? And ultimately the quality of the software that we use every day?
Well, I think well-managed life cycles lead to happier developers.
Okay.
And as a result, better software for everyone.
Okay.
When code is clean, efficient, well-structured, it's easier to understand, to modify, to debug.
Right.
This reduces frustration for developers and allows them to focus
on more creative and impactful aspects of their work.
So it kind of creates this more positive and productive development environment, which ultimately leads to a better user experience.
Precisely. Think of it like a chef.
Okay.
When they have a well-organized kitchen with the right tools and ingredients, they can really focus on creating delicious and innovative dishes.
Right.
And it's the same principle with software development.
Okay.
When developers have a solid foundation and a clear understanding of how their code behaves, they can create truly amazing things.
I love that analogy. It really drives home the point that good lifecycle management isn't just about ticking boxes on a technical checklist. It's about creating an environment where both the code and the people who create it can really flourish.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think the story of Arin defending Planet Codex is a great metaphor for that.
It's about recognizing that software is more than just lines of code. It's a reflection of human ingenuity, problem solving, and this desire to make a positive impact on the world.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
It has.
We've explored the technical nuances, uncovered the power of hooks, and even touched on the philosophical implications of software development.
Absolutely.
It's given me a lot to think about.
Well, I'm glad. And, if there's one key takeaway I hope our listeners leave with, it's that lifecycle management isn't just a chore, it's an opportunity. It's a chance to, craft something truly special, something that reflects our best selves and our highest aspirations as developers.
Absolutely. And on that inspiring note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive.
Sounds good.
But as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deeper into the fascinating world of software development.
Absolutely.
Until next time, happy coding.